The work of war makes it a hard job to keep children out of mischief. Fathers are in the services, mothers are in the factories, and there aren't enough police to be everywhere at once. It isn't surprising that juvenile delinquency has got bigger. Newspapers print stories daily of boys and girls between the ages of 8 and 16 being brought into court for wrongdoings, for truancy, disorderly behavior, gambling, theft and housebreaking. 1 in every 10 crimes and offences in Scotland is committed by boys and girls under 17. When something which begins as mischief ends up as crime, it has got to be stopped. The police will make inquiries about these boys. They and their parents will have to appear in court. They will have to answer for the offences for which they are responsible. But just how responsible are they? Nearly 5 million people live in Scotland. Over 2/3 of them are crowded into the towns and cities. The 4 great cities alone, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee and Aberdeen, hold almost 2 million people. Children weren't considered when these towns were built. They are shut in by factories, warehouses and tenements. They are lost among granite streets and pavements, courts, wynds and closes. Where can they play? Where can children go in a city? They can go home. A child's home should be the centre of its affection and loyalty. But nearly 500,000 Scottish families live in homes with less than 1 room for 2 people. Too often the fathers have lost their self-respect. This labourer had less than 3 years steady work in the 10 years up to the war. Too often the mothers are drained of their energies. Too often 1 bed has to do for the whole family. Seen against such a background, just how responsible is the child offender? Free schools, free meals, free milk, free medical attention are all provided for those who need it. But most children don't go to school until they are 5, and by then the harm is done. Their bodies and minds already show the effects of not enough food and not enough sleep. For some of this their parents must be held responsible. But just how much? As children, they themselves were brought up under similar, if not worse, conditions. After the last war, overcrowding in Scotland was as bad as it is today. Many of those who moved into better homes struggle to live up to the new standard, struggle day in, day out to make a decent home life for their family. But a good home costs a lot in hard cash. Gas, electricity, rent and furniture have to be paid for, and children take so much for granted. A great deal is done for children while they are at school, between the ages of 5 and 14. But school stops at 4 in the afternoon, and of course there's no school on Saturday or Sunday. After tea, children want to let off steam until they are tired enough to go to bed. They go out onto the streets. There's plenty to do on the streets. No one pays much attention to them, but they are all eyes. There are rides to be stolen on the backs of carts and lorries. There are the shopping centres with miles of inviting windows. There are the big chain stores to wander through. There is noise and colour and bustle, and they can listen to what people say. They get to know where everything is and just how much it costs. They see that money is the key to all this, to the cinema and to the billiard saloon and Dixon Hock and pie and beans. In this careless world of adults, who is to tell children where to draw the line, to explain where excitement ends and crime begins? And now these 3 children must answer to the law for what they have done. They and their parents have been summoned to appear before the court, but not the ordinary adult court. By an Act of Parliament passed in 1937, commonly known as the Children's Charter, the law provides that there should be special juvenile courts. The law states that juvenile courts must not be held in the same place as the adult courts, or if there is lack of accommodation, not on the same day. Juvenile courts usually sit once a week. At a table sit the 3 justices. One should always be a woman. The chairman is in the centre. In a good juvenile court, children will not be so frightened that they are tongue-tied. If the court usher is a policeman, he generally wears plain clothes. At one end of the table sits the clerk of the court. He reads out the charge of theft by housebreaking against Alec, Duncan and Robbie. The chairman then asks the children if the charge read out is true. They admit that it is, so it isn't necessary to call witnesses. Alec also admits to 3 previous appearances in court. The prosecutor now gives the court fuller details of what the children have done. Legal terms are put in simple words. It is essential that they should understand everything that is going on. Behind the prosecutor is a representative of the Education Authority. Beside him are 2 of the probation officers. With the exception of the press, no one else is allowed in a juvenile court. The court will have before it a school and medical report on each child and a report from the probation officer about their home circumstances. These will help the court to reach a full understanding of the children's behaviour. These courts do not send children to prison. Their whole aim and object is the good of the children. The Children Act of 1937 provides a number of different methods of treatment, and it is for the court to decide which is the best in each case. Each of these boys will be studied separately. His school gives Robbie, aged 10, a fairly good report. His squint is being treated by the school medical service. The probation officer's report shows that his home is a good one. When asked for their views, the parents say that Robbie is a crybaby and quarrels a lot with his brothers and sisters. The court thinks that Robbie's squint may have something to do with this. They notice that he is not wearing any glasses. The case might be met by fining the parents, but they decide not to do this. The chairman warns Robbie that he has got to behave in future. He impresses on the parents that Robbie's future depends on them, and that he must be taken to a child guidance clinic. The case will be kept open for 6 months till the court hears how he has got on. And now Duncan, aged 13, is called in with his mother. The school attendance officer tells the court that Duncan has been playing truant, although his standard of intelligence is higher than the average. The chairman asks the mother if she has any explanation. She says her husband is in the army overseas. She herself goes out to work and gets a neighbour to keep an eye on Duncan. She admits that she can't control him and that he is always out of the house. She welcomes the chance to tell her troubles to the court. Nobody else wanted to hear them. The court can help her. If sent to a remand home, Duncan could be given a month's firm discipline. His home, however, is a good one, and the court do not feel that it is wise to separate him from his mother. The chairman tells Duncan that he will be allowed to stay at home, but he will be on probation. He has got to prove himself. Mr. MacDonald over there is a probation officer. He will call at Duncan's home regularly. If, at the end of 12 months, Duncan has attended school regularly and has satisfied Mr. MacDonald, that will be the end of the matter. But if Duncan behaves badly, Mr. MacDonald must bring him before the court again. The case of Alec, aged 13 and a half, is more serious. He is obviously the ringleader. Only 6 months ago he was put on probation for stealing. Mr. MacDonald says that the occasional discipline of probation isn't strong enough to counteract the temptations which surround Alec. His home is deplorable. His father is a drunkard and never stays long in a job. His mother is apathetic and feckless. The only chance for Alec to improve is for him to be taken away from his family. To separate a boy from his home is a grave step for the court to take. It needs careful and serious thought. At the same time, the probation officers are putting their heads together over the problem of what can best be done for Alec's younger brothers and sisters, to give them a better chance. Perhaps they could be boarded out with foster parents. How would that do for Alec? Legally possible, yes, but it wouldn't give him the much-needed continuous discipline. After weighing up every fact of the problem, the court makes its decision. Alec must be sent to an approved school. Alec's mother raises no objections. Later in the week, Robbie and his mother set off to the child guidance clinic as the court advised. This is a service run free by the local authority. At the clinic are a psychiatric social worker, an educational psychologist, and a medical psychologist. It is their job to help any problem children. What can be done for a child depends on the advice of all three experts. All through the treatment, they will work in close touch with one another. Apart from children sent by juvenile courts, schools and doctors often send children to the clinic. Children have even been known to turn up of their own accord. After a few words with his mother, the social worker takes Robbie in to meet the educational psychologist. He's then taken through a series of tests which will give the educational psychologist an accurate measure of his mental age and standard of education. While this is going on, the social worker takes an opportunity to have a private chat with Robbie's mother. It is most important that parents should feel that their children are in good hands, because their willing cooperation is essential to the success of any treatment. For example, Robbie's mother can tell the social worker about his squint and whether the others make fun of him. In the meantime, the educational psychologist has made her assessment and she takes Robbie in to see the doctor, a medical psychologist. Leaving the boy to amuse himself for a few minutes, the two psychologists discuss the results of the first stage of the inquiry. The tests show that Robbie is more intelligent than the average boy of his own age. He ought by now to be in a higher class at school. Now it's the doctor's turn. He wants to try to get Robbie to reveal his thoughts and feelings. Robbie is getting on very fast and is expressing himself with remarkable clearness. Without jumping to any hasty conclusions at this early stage of the analysis, the doctor can see from the way Robbie has played with the figures in the sand tree that he is a lonely child. He has put himself behind the tree, alone and unseen, cut off from his family. He fears himself unwanted. The defect in Robbie's eyes, the working of his 10-year-old mind, his place at school and the attitude of his family towards him are problems which can be tackled together. Mr. MacDonald, the probation officer, pays his first call on Duncan. Probation officers are trained social workers, responsible to the court and paid by the local authority with the help of a government grant. In Scotland, their appointment has to be approved by the Secretary of State. Their job, and it's a very tough job, is to win the confidence and respect of children who, as their behavior shows, often have very little respect for anything or anybody. From the day the probation officer takes the boy on, it will be a tussle between the insight and sympathy of the one and the undisciplined revolt of the other. If Mr. MacDonald is too kind, Duncan will laugh at him. If he is too strict, Duncan will try to outwit him. After all, Mr. MacDonald is not the boy's father, yet it is a father's affectionate discipline that is needed. Mr. MacDonald doesn't expect to get much out of Duncan at this early stage, but he does intend to impress on the boy that he will allow no more truancy, and visits are appointments that have got to be kept. In about a year, Duncan will leave school. Mr. MacDonald will help him into a job, but in the meantime he wants him definitely to join a youth organization. This will keep him off the streets out of school hours and give him an outlet for his energies. It's rather like trying to break in a young colt, and he's got a year to do it in. Alec is a problem of a very different sort. The court's decision to lift him right out of his environment is the kindest one. The education authority officer is taking him to an approved school. It is a long way out of the city. Alec begins to realize that he has lost his freedom. Privately, he makes up his mind that somehow or other as soon as he can find a decent chance, he's going to escape. Already he is feeling homesick in these unfamiliar surroundings. An approved school is no more and no less than a boarding school of a special kind. What delinquent children need, as all children need, are fresh air, good food, plenty of sleep, teaching graded carefully to fit their mental needs, discipline, and opportunities to use their energy constructively. Loss of freedom is the thing a child feels most, and treatment at the school is based on privileges earned. Freedom is regained gradually. Privileges range from extra pocket money, free evenings and fortnights at home, to being released on license after a year or 18 months. A great deal will depend on Alec himself, but even more depends on the adults who have charge of him. As in the juvenile court, as in child guidance, as in probation, it isn't so much the theories that are important as the people who apply them. To understand children, to get to know how their minds work, to grasp that their outlook towards living is different from ours. This is a full-time job demanding great patience and insight into character. Alec may still run away, but more probably he will settle down and find his feet. When the time comes for a boy to leave, the schools have an after-care service, and no boy is flung on a busy world without someone behind him to help him and sustain him. Robbie, Duncan, and Alec were caught in the act of committing a crime, but they have not been branded as criminals. They have been given the help they so badly needed. But what about the other 750,000 children in the towns and cities of Scotland? Only a small percentage of them ever come near a court, and of these, thousands have the same kind of parents as Alec. They may grow up to be like him. Some are like Robbie. The unhappiness of their life at home may lead them into trouble. Some, like Duncan, from what look to be good homes, are fussed over too much. But a child, like a plant, must grow, and if thwarted, will grow crooked. What help can we give to all the children of our crowded towns and cities? Can the school provide an answer to the tremendous demands of children? Think back yourself. How many children were there in your class? What chance had the teachers of giving you individual attention? How many schools have playing space where children can go and play out of school hours? And what about the long evenings? Where can a lad and his pals get together, make their model aeroplanes, arrange football fixtures, and when they're a bit older, argue or dance? Something more than the home and the school is needed. Shouldn't small children have play centres? And shouldn't there be youth organisations and clubs for the older ones? Shouldn't there be plenty of these places scattered throughout all our towns and cities? All this is now a responsibility of the education authorities and the state. A great deal of this work is already being done by the churches and voluntary organisations. The authorities' main job is to see that gaps are filled. And a lot of the gaps are to be found in those corners of towns which are black spots of delinquency. After school hours and before bedtime, and above all at weekends, all children should have their own clubs and centres. Here they can let loose all the energy and imagination which so often boils over in the streets and back alleys. As things are today, thousands of children grow up struggling against a world which appears to have been created mainly for grown-ups. Part of that struggle finds an outlet in actions which lead to the juvenile court. This would happen much less often if only we gave our children more room in which to let loose their energy and imagination. They must be given the ways and means to work out their own development. We must make it as exciting for our children to build their own world as is the present temptation to destroy the world of their parents. We must decide to get to grips with the problem, or to allow this sort of thing to go on.